Alright guys, we're going to talk about RUROUNI Kenshin Season 2, Episode 8, and this one introduces us to Broomhead himself, Cho the Sword Hunter, a member of the Jupongatna, or the Ten Swords, whatever you want to call them. Basically, Shishio's elite group of swordsmen that he is gathering all together in Kyoto. We know a handful of the Ten Swords at this point in the story. I'm not going to go ahead to not spoil anything for anybody watching Kenshin for the first time, but obviously we have Sojiro, who we've seen plenty of times, Shishio's right-hand man, and the one responsible for breaking Kenshin's reverse blade sword in half. We have seen Anji, the 6-foot-tall, super jacked monk living in the woods punching rocks, which is a life that I wish I was living, but regardless, Sonosuke has encountered him, not knowing that he was associated with Shishio, and now he has been recruited as well. And now we have been introduced to Cho, the Sword Hunter, and by his subtitle alone, you know exactly what he's all about. He is a man that's just obsessed with swords, but even more so than that, he's obsessed with killing with swords. He likes finding rare artifacts, unique items, and we'll see a lot of variety in the types of swords that he has. What's interesting about this new remake version is that I felt like in this interpretation, they made him seem a lot younger than how he felt in the original 90s version. Now, I don't know how old the character is supposed to be. Looking in the manga, he looks a lot more similar to the 90s version, but I don't know if anybody else got that vibe. That might just be a me thing too. Like maybe I'm just seeing things, but he felt like he was a lot younger in this incarnation than he was in the original version. And I also do want to say that despite how much I have been praising the Kyoto arc in the new remake version of the RUROUNI Kenshin anime, and I do think that they have done a number of things so far that have impressed me and have even been better than the 90s version, which is the one that I've known for 20 years and fell in love with, and is the reason I'm a fan of RUROUNI Kenshin at all. But having said all that, I do have to say that when it comes to Kenshin versus Cho, at least the first half of the fight that we saw, the 90s version did it way better. Way, way better. Just the dynamic of the fight, the intensity, the shots that they used. For some reason, I don't know if they were maybe tight on budget or under a time constraint. I know sometimes creating anime in Japan can be an extremely hectic and sometimes kind of an abusive environment for the animators. I don't know the case with this show in particular, but it felt like this episode, the animation was a little bit stunted. And when Kenshin was fighting Cho, the shots that they chose were very, very basic. It was just like, you know, Cho thrusts with the sword, Kenshin blocks it, you see it all in frame. There weren't any kind of intense dynamic pieces of animation when it came to the fight, which kind of let me down because one thing that this new version of Kenshin has been doing very well is upping the intensity with the fight scenes. But this one took a step back. I would highly recommend, well, I mean, this kind of cuts it in the middle. There's a cliffhanger, but after the next episode, I would highly recommend going back and watching the Kenshin versus Cho fight in the 90s version because so far, way better. But besides that, I do think you get a very good introduction to him here, but I'll try to go in order. So the actual beginning of this episode, well, it starts with a joke with Misao, which is in the manga, which I found pretty funny. But then it cuts to Shishio at his hideout, I guess you want to call it, where we met the character that we met at the end of the last episode named Hoji. Now, he is also a member of the Jupongatna, but he's obviously not a fighter. He's not a swordsman. I kind of made an analogy that he's very similar to like the Saul Goodman of Shishio's crew, where he's the man kind of pulling strings behind the scenes. He's more of the businessman. He gets shit done. He figures things out. And he's also just extremely intelligent when it comes to strategizing and what we should do next. Now, you might get the wrong impression in this episode, maybe, that he kind of argues against a point that Shishio made, that maybe deep down he wants to be the one in charge, or maybe deep down he's like thinking about betraying Shishio at one point. Well, I don't want to squash any of your theories or anything if you're watching it for the first time, but what I can say is that everything is in service of Shishio, and every decision that Hoji makes is for the best interest of Shishio. He really wants to see him succeed. He believes in him to a sickening degree that we will see coming up in the series. But Hoji's character, although he may argue, he may piss and moan, he may disagree with Shishio, everything is for the greater service of Shishio's victory, which is an extremely scary thing when you have a character that doesn't just obey and comply with everything that his leader tells him, but instead will correct his leader and be like, this is actually what we should do. And that is sort of Hoji's superpower in a way, where he is kind of the best person that you would want. He is one of the main guys that is propelling Shishio's path to victory, and he's doing a very good job of it. Besides that, we see Cho shows up, and we see he's carrying a variety of swords. He has a ridiculous amount of swords on him, to the point where it just is absurd. He's got 2 swords in his hands, he's got 2 swords in his back, he's got a sword wrapped around his abdomen, he's got so many swords he doesn't know what to do with. And what's the first thing that he wants to do when he gets to Kyoto? I want another sword. So he finds out that Shaku Arai's final sword exists and it is nearby. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to go pick that up because I need to add that to my collection. And he basically does just that. Well, it's actually Seiku that he goes to, who is the son of Shaku Arai, that has now basically become a man forging cutlery for the kitchen as opposed to forging swords. Something practical, useful in this new era. And this is the thing where Kenshin, you know, he could have tried to plead with him. He could have tried to convince him. He could have even told him everything that's happening. Like, look, your dad made me a reverse-bladed sword, and I've, you know, taken up this vow not to kill. I really would like another one created so I can continue to try to protect, you know, this country from this terrorist that plots to take it over. And he could have gone on this whole, you know, epic speech to try to convince Seiku to do this. But the thing about Kenshin is that he understands what he's fighting for at the end of the day, which is people to be able to live in peace and not have to have this pressure or this fear of plunging the world back into war or having to create weapons that kill or anything like that. He sees this family living perfectly fine, having their own business, living together. He sees the baby, Iori, you know, the kind of hope for the next generation. And he's like, I'm going to leave that be. You know, and that's kind of what I see for Kenshin's character is like, it's not that Kenshin couldn't probably convince him if he told him the entire truth of what was going on, but he doesn't want to have to put that burden on to Seiku. You know, Kenshin is very much a guy that's like, if I can handle it myself, I'll handle it myself. I mean, think about the fact that he walked to Kyoto alone. Like he walked away from Kaoru, a woman that loves him. He walked away from Sanosuke, a dude that would have followed him into war. You know, he walked away from Yahiko, that looks up to him. He walked away from all of his friends because he didn't want to have to, well, 1, put that burden on them, or 2, you know, put them in potential danger of Shishio and assassinations and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it very much is within his character to do that. But now this situation has arose where, and again, it is kind of not, I don't want to say it's Kenshin's fault, but because Kenshin was there, Shishio's men found out Kenshin was talking to him, found out he had a final sword, which Cho went there for. So Kenshin does feel at least a little bit responsible probably for Iori getting kidnapped. And great scene, by the way. They pulled that off really well. That scene was fine. It's just the fight scene between Kenshin and Cho that I think they did way better in the 90s version. But everything leading up to that was done really, really well. And unfortunately, we don't get the full fight in this episode. I was really hoping that we would, but it is kind of cut in half. We only get the first half of the fight. So unfortunately, I can't talk about the thing that I really want to talk about because it won't happen until the next episode. So I guess until then, I thought, you know, I still like the creativity of Cho. Just going by, okay, so maybe I didn't like the fight scene in this version as much as the 90s version, but the idea of what he's doing is really cool. And the fact that Kenshin is at a massive disadvantage, that he has a broken sword, that he's fighting with the sheath. I do love the line of dialogue where Kenshin's like, you know that your opponent has a broken weapon and you have a hostage, yet you call this a fair fight. Like, just calling Cho out for his bullshit, you know? Breaking the swords on his back, and then, of course, Cho putting the 2 swords together, and Kenshin just immediately blocking it, breaking the swords. Just nothing. Like, Cho, okay, again, I don't want to spoil anything. Cho isn't a joke of a character, but it's just, you're fighting Kenshin. You know what I mean? It's like you're fighting the Batosai. And in the next episode, something really, really wonderful in the story happens, but I'm not going to talk about it till then. So I guess I will just leave this for now saying that I thought this episode was good. But I will say that I think maybe just the animation felt a little bit stunted to me. It just didn't seem to be quite up to par with the rest of the season so far. But I know sometimes animation, gets stretched thin because they're working on the entire season at once, and I don't hold that against the show. Just something that I noticed for this episode in particular. But anyways, guys, let me know what you thought about this episode down below. If you're a first-time Kenshin watcher, leave all your thoughts, theories, and opinions about what you think is going to happen next. And as always, thank you guys so much for the support and these videos, man. Everybody that left a super thanks in the last video, I appreciate you so much. Helps out the channel way more than you think it does, especially around this time a year. So thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. Leave a thumbs up, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next episode with a lot more to talk about.